Walter Jr. was real today, where do you think he would be? Do you think he would have followed in his dad's footsteps or fell into addiction, ended up in prison, or gone off to college?
My hope for Walt Jr. would be that he would follow in kind of his uncle's path, in Hank. More of, go to university, start learning, and kind of trying. In my opinion, he would be working on undoing the damage his father had done.
Could this be the next Breaking Bad spinoff? Now hear me out, because I think this would actually be dope. Now I can't speak for all Breaking Bad fans, but me personally, I've been wanting to see something post Walter White. See, Better Call Saul was cool, and I know a lot of you guys look at that show like the greatest thing that ever happened in TV history, but that did not scratch the Breaking Bad itch for me personally. However, showing what that world is post Walter White, the devastation that was left behind, the vacuum in the drug market that created, and how it changed the characters that we came to love or hate or watched through the Breaking Bad series. And I actually think following Walt Jr. as the main protagonist, trying to clear his family's name, walking around with that chip on his shoulder of what his father did, would be great to see. And like the actor says in the interview, Walt Jr. would not be following in his father's footsteps, he'd be following in his Uncle Hank's. The show showed us plenty of scenes where Walt Jr. loved what his Uncle Hank was doing, where he was super interested in that world, where he was super into all the stories Hank would tell him, and he wanted to be a part of it. So I think regardless of what his father ended up doing, Walt Jr. probably would have been in law enforcement, DEA, something along those lines, regardless. But I think his father, being one of the biggest drug kingpins of all time, probably put a lot of fuel in his fire. And Walt Jr. would definitely be old enough to be a detective or a DEA agent. He would be in his mid to late 20s at this point. And another thing to keep in mind is Walt kept his family in the dark from so much stuff that there's a bunch of things that they never knew about and never knew the truth about. So imagine Walt Jr. as a detective trying to get through the bottom of everything that happened, all the players involved, and ultimately trying to clean up the city, the state, and the country from the crime and the drugs that his father helped introduce. From the little tiny bit of what we got to see in the post-Walter White world, from, Better Call Saul, the ending scenes of that show, and also some of what is that movie called, El Dorado, that Jesse, the post thing about Jesse after he leaves the compound, is that Walter White is looked at like Osama bin Laden. I mean, he is looked at like a terrorist, like just a mass murderer. I mean, he is held in such disregard, distaste, hatred. I mean, people probably have his picture in urinals, right? And it makes sense that after these events, Skyler and Walter Jr. and the baby Holly, would have definitely had to go in witness protection. And with all the enemies that Walt made throughout the show, who knows how much Walt Jr., Skyler, knows how much they have to constantly look over their shoulder, worried about some revenge cast upon them from someone who they don't know, someone who they've never done anything to. But because they're Walt's family, blood in, blood out, omerta or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, they got to settle scores, and it doesn't matter if they're innocent or not. They're related to Walt, so, nothing's off the table there. But Walt Jr. has always been about trying to do what's morally right. We see this plenty of times throughout Breaking Bad. That is a core part of his character. So you can definitely see a scenario where Walt Jr. is just fed up with being on the run, looking over their shoulder, having to relocate his mom, his baby sister, because they're in constant fear of the bad men coming after them for revenge. So instead of running from the darkness, what does Walt Jr. do? He decides to go out and face it. He becomes a DEA agent like his uncle and decides to go after the drug kingpins and cartels and violent criminals like his father and like who his father associated with. And another part of this that's really interesting is you got to remember what we saw as the viewer is not known to almost anyone in this world. So we saw Jesse almost as a victim, as someone with a very kind heart that was just kind of swept up in all this. But to the rest of the world, he's Walter White's partner. So Walt Jr. being driven by this passion to right all of his father's wrongs and go after all the people who his dad was associated with, he's definitely going to be after Jesse. It's not like Jesse worked with the police at the end of all this. He went on the run, he faked his death or whatever with the vacuum guy, went to Alaska. So he is still a huge, infamous fugitive at large. And remember how Skyler blamed Jesse for getting Walt involved in all this. So as far as Walt Jr. is concerned, Jesse really could have been the brains and the top of that whole operation that his father was all swept up in. So let's talk about the elephant in the room about Walt Jr. going after these notorious violent criminals, right? Clearly the character has a disability. He had a disability in the show. Everybody knows this. But for all intents and purposes, Walt had a disability. Walt had deadly cancer that was killing him every episode. The dude would be in the middle of something serious and have to belt over and cough up blood. Walt did not use his physicality to get out of these violent situations. He used his brains. And a very interesting through line between these two characters is to show, even though they're completely opposite and different morally in terms of, what they feel like is the right thing, or, in Walt's case, has he ever thought about what the right thing is? But their intellect, right? So even though they're completely different in everything else, the one thing that Walt Jr. has in common with his father is the intellect and using his brains to get through and get out of dangerous situations. So to me personally, this sounds dope. I'm all for it. Breaking Bad to me is like the greatest show of all time. So I'm anything Breaking Bad related, I'm all for, but I think this is a dope idea. Let me know in the comments. What do you think?